Okay, so we're picking up in the crash course in Jewish history, and in this session, we're now going to focus on the next 500 years in Jewish history, where we go from Abraham, the birth of Abraham, until the giving of the Torah. But another way to look at this whole period of time is really to call it the 500 years of national formation. I mean, it's important to realize it took 5 centuries for the Jewish people to really develop from one individual, Abraham, to we're standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, ready to accept our national mandate from God. 5 centuries, so it's a tremendous chunk of time. So let's understand what happened during this period. So the 500 years can be divided into 2 main sections. We have building a dynasty, which was 290 years, where we have individuals who are really becoming the first family of the Jewish people. Just to get them clear, we have Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac was their son who marries Rebekah. They have a son, Jacob, who marries 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah. And together, Jacob, Rachel, and Leah, along with their midwives, not midwives, but their maidservants, they have 12 sons who have become the 12 tribes of Israel. They grow into the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, to get more particulars on these individuals and the specifics within their lifetime, I really want to refer you to the crash course in Torah, where we go through it more in detail. But as a group of people, it's important to appreciate the impact they have. Before we do that, let's just get clear. The other 210 years comes from the experience in Egypt. So we have 500 years, 290, we're building this dynasty of the Jewish people, which grows into a nation within the land of Egypt, which we're going to look at as well here in this video. So let's understand what these individuals are really about. So the first thing to really appreciate, it wasn't one individual that started the whole thing going and then got other disparate people together for a common purpose. It was a family. And these 7 individuals were quite remarkable. First of all, they were brilliant intellects. Abraham himself was the one who rationalized that there must be one God. It didn't make sense that the world works in disunity and that you have a myriad of different forces ruling over the planet. He rationalized the idea of one God and then started to influence the rest of the world. So they're brilliant scholars and intellects. Secondly, they were courageous revolutionaries. They're willing to take that idea and spread it to others. Originally, they tried to get people to believe in the idea of one God, and they took tremendous risks and were seen as outsiders in the different nations they had to travel amongst. They were respected leaders, whether it was the Pharaoh in Egypt or those who were the leaders of the Philistines. They were seen as princes amongst the people. They were spiritual giants. They were able to take the ideas of humanity and express in very great levels a commitment to one's fellow, and also willing to take tremendous risks. We know with the binding of Isaac, all these issues you'll see more in detail when you go through the crash course in Torah. And finally, they were faithful servants. These 7 individuals were willing to go on a journey to build a nation. Really, when you just look at it, you and your wife going out to start a nation, it's rather hard to see it come together, but that's what they're willing to do and follow God's directives. So this is the founding family of the Jewish people. The trick is, how do you turn a family like that into a nation where you're going to have millions of people really have the same level of commitment or the same type of commitment, but as a group? Obviously you can't make a cookie-cutter type nation where everybody's going to be of the same ilk, and nevertheless you're going to have a fabric of the nation where the same commitment underlies the national resolve to go and manage throughout history despite tremendous challenges. So what's going to build that family into a nation? Well, it was the experience in Egypt, and that's what we're going to focus on right now. These 210 years are really understood in Jewish tradition as the crucible that took individuals and turned them into a nation that could perpetuate one generation after the next, a commitment that would survive the vicissitudes of history. So let's look at Egypt more specifically. The experience in Egypt was 210 years. 94 years we have a gradual assimilation where the Jews went from being these great individuals into unfortunately assimilating to the culture that they were living amongst. And then we have 116 years where eventually we become slaves. So this is the experience that the Jews went through. They're living amongst the most powerful nation on earth. It was also the most impure nation. In fact, tradition says that the Jewish people descended to the 49th level of impurity. There are 50 levels of what's called spiritual impurity. The Jewish people were completely ruined almost to the 50th level. They were at the their 49th before they were redeemed from Egypt. And they ended up having to have the Egyptians as their masters, very cruel masters, that committed to trying to destroy the Jewish people's resolve to grow as a nation, to reproduce. And they tried to crush their spirit in any way they possibly could. And we know all the brutality, and the Torah tells us what happens in the book of Exodus. So again, I'm going to refer you to the crash course in Torah to get more understanding. But we knew this was all part of a plan. Moses is born in the land of Egypt during the time of brutal oppression, and God then comes to Moses later on in his life, and again, go back to the crash course in Torah to get the details, but we're going to have 10 plagues in the land of Egypt. The first 3 really focus on God's absolute control over the land and the water, with blood, frogs, and lice. The next 3 plagues show his control over everything that walks the earth, with wild animals, pestilence, and boils. The next set of 3 plagues shows his control over the heavens, with the plagues of hail, locusts, and darkness. And the final plague, which does the Egyptians in, is death of the firstborn. And we have to appreciate that in the ancient world, the firstborn were really the political class. All the power went to the firstborn of the family, and therefore to see that entire class being wiped out in one night as the Jews are preparing for the redemption, that was it. At that point, Pharaoh says, it's time for you to go. Now, these entire plagues lasted a year. It was 1 full year that Egypt was going through this, and at the same time, the Jews are witnessing this incredible nation fall to pieces as God takes them apart, piece by piece. And so the nation of Israel is born, and it's important to appreciate the 3 major events that culminate in the birth of the Jewish people. First, we have the liberation from Egypt, the mass exodus. We never had that before in history, that a slave nation should actually be freed and establish its own nation. 7 days later, we have the moment of deliverance, when the Jewish people miraculously crossed the Red Sea on dry land when we were being pursued by the Egyptians, who tried to reclaim us as their slaves. And then 50 days after getting out of Egypt, we're standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, and we have what's called national revelation. And this is where we accept the Torah sight unseen, and we're willing to become God's nation, his treasured nation amongst the peoples of the world, to be a blessing upon the world. And it's important to realize that we didn't come together as individuals and say, okay, now what are we going to do? What's going to be our arrangement amongst us? But the nation of Israel was born from the people together collectively saying, we'll do and come to understand eventually everything God wants from us as we accept this mission to be his people. So the nation of Israel is born. If you go to the crash course in Torah, you'll understand a lot more of the events at Mount Sinai, specifically in the book of Exodus. And I think it's wise to point out here, if anybody ever wants to get an understanding of the Jewish mindset, our national psyche, you just have to look at these 3 events that happened within the span of 7 weeks: the mass exodus from Egypt, the deliverance at the sea, and the revelation at Mount Sinai, to understand that the Jewish people are a nation born of hope amidst tremendous trials and tribulations. We're a nation that's seen miracles in our midst in abundance, and we're a nation that experienced God's presence in a way that has never been experienced again. And therefore our drive and our willingness to try to make things happen and work and survive, even if it means 2,000 years of exile, which we'll see coming up in later videos in the crash course, this moment here in these 5 centuries really is what did it for us. So we ended up becoming a nation that's willing to pursue the dreams and hopes and aspirations of the patriarchs and matriarchs, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob with Rachel and Leah, and then the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is the 5 centuries of national transformation. So let's do a little review. We have 500 years of national formation. We're building a dynasty for 290 years with Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob married Rachel and Leah, and the 12 tribes of Israel, and then the 210 years in Egypt. I'm going to sum up here very succinctly a basic pattern of exile, which is going to be repeated throughout history. We have success, which eventually, unfortunately, leads to suspicion. Who exactly are these Jews in our midst, which leads, unfortunately, to suffering and persecution and eventual salvation. And salvation isn't just that things work out in the end, but it's the belief that things are going to work out, which has been the thing which keeps us going through these tremendously difficult periods of time. So that's the 500 years of national formation.